clear my cash bag.
We finished off last lecture a fair way through this case study, and we just ran out of time, so let's finish it off. Today what we're going to do is we'll finish off culture. We'll have a look at a little bit about integration, how to hold organisations together, and then we'll have a look at some cultural change. And there's a couple of negative case studies today, so they're not all positive. We'll finish off on a negative note. We were a fair way through Google last lecture. In 2009, they set up Google Ventures. They've made over 100 acquisitions. They've also patented 187 products. That's actually not true now. If we go back there, they acquired for about 12.5 billion Motorola Mobility in 2011, and that got them about 17,000 patents. And they're using that to support their Android technology. I believe Android's gone to number one ahead of the iPhone now. I guess if you look at a Google data center, they have their data centers buried around the world. One of the data centers, in their data centers, there's over 1 million servers. One of them's the size of 2 football fields with cooling towers to keep the data centers cool, the size of a 4-story building. So Google's shape truly is a visionary culture, but they've also built out here on task-based by setting very high standards, high goals. They've also pulled out here on the people culture, and they're an engineering culture too on the logic. The way they've been able to really keep building this visionary culture is to surround themselves with small firms or small companies to give them that visionary culture. And that's why they're doing lots of acquisitions. It's not just Google. They're acquiring lots of small IT companies. And if you look in the Googleplex, they're very attuned to making sure their people are very happy. They've got breakout rooms. They provide snacks and drinks and table tennis tables and pools and those sorts of things. Keep people alive in the company and as free spirits. They've also got a veggie garden in the middle of the complex. That also supplies their cafe, and they serve the food out of their veggie garden in their cafe. Everyone eats together, plays together, shares ideas together. So really a visionary culture plus a people culture too. And I guess they're hired for their ability rather than their experience. They say in Google, you take 1 day off a week to work on your own projects. A lot of the time that's working on engineering functions or testing functions. But it's a pretty free culture, and they definitely do support their visionary element. And the nice thing about Google is it's an engineering culture applied to a marketing and advertising world. And they quantified what the advertising world hated. The advertising agencies hated reporting on whether they're doing a good job or not. Google's been the one that came in and placed quantitative results on a qualitative industry. Revenues and profits, as I said, they didn't really make any money because they were licensing their search engine back here. They started making money when they got AdWords out, and they started charging for advertising. That's also when they started charging for profit. So they're making about 40 billion in revenue now, and about 10 billion in profits. And the two boys that started it are worth about 20 billion each. As I said, they're making about a 40 billion turnover, 10 billion profit, and employing about 24,000 Googlers globally. So that's a little bit about a visionary culture. Let's have a look at a logic-based culture based on facts. And in the exam, I will spend a fair bit of the time on the exam asking questions about personality and culture. A logical culture is, I guess people are very loosely aligned in these organisations. They tend to identify with an organisational group rather than with people within the organisation. the staff are very autonomous, very highly skilled. They solve complex problems, tend to work behind closed doors and on quite secretive projects. They rarely agree with the performance standards of the organisation, so the leaders feel quite isolated and alone or ineffective, and that's true. Can anybody think of an organisation that's like this, where most of the people are working alone or they don't really interface with each other?
IBM.
Sorry?
IBM.
IBM would be one. Yeah, that would be one. Any others? Yeah. UTS is one. And it's full of individuals that tend to work alone. Professional organisations, consultants. You'll probably end up in an organisation very much like this. Engineering consulting firms, law firms, those sort of virtual organisations where people are out on the road working with customers all the time. That tends to be a logic-based organisation. The way to build that culture, recruit people that are very self-disciplined and also work independently. And a lot of the lecturers do that. Also give them a lot of freedom and flexibility. And that's we have something here called academic freedom, where they give you a lot of freedom to do your own thing. So if you're looking at these organisations, these are the people, the maps of the people. You've got the financial people, the engineers, the stockbrokers, the CEOs, research and technical. The typical organisations here are engineering consulting firms, legal firms, accounting firms, universities, research institutes. So let's have a look at UTS. Academics tend to work behind closed doors or from home. They prepare classes and write papers. They very rarely interface with each other. In fact, the lecturers in the core program, I think you call it the core program, are about the only ones that interface together. The rest of them tend to work in isolation. The good ones tend to have quite demanding jobs. You've seen the film Indiana Jones, where he's a lecturer by day and then he has big balls that chase him in archaeological digs at night. The lecturers that are any good tend to have their own consulting firms or working outside on projects. They rarely interface with each other. They tend to interface with the students, their clients, or the research sponsors. And they tend to also interface with other academics around the world. An example of this is a guy that used to work here called Austin Mack. And he used to be working on the shape of the stealth bomber's wings. And his friends in the world, he only had about 3 friends. One of them was in Oxford University. He was here at UTS. The other 2 were buried under a mountain in Colorado somewhere, in the working for the Defence Forces over in the US. So they tend to be quite private about what they're working on, and quite lonely individuals. What we're trying to do in universities now is trying to move, support the logic culture, but form research institutes where you're working as a team rather than as an individual, because most businesses work as teams now rather than individuals. So that's a little bit about the culture of UTS. So we've done UTS, we've done Google. Let's have a look at a people-based culture based on emotions and people. This is a culture where organisations tend to share their interests and values. They celebrate birthdays. They're always meeting in corridors and talking together. There's a high component of socialising in these organisations. A lot of you are working for organisations. Try to have a think about your own organisation, see which one you fit into. The job definitions tend to be very vague, and also the tasks. There's a lot of information sharing and teamwork in these organisations, but on the downside, you can get cliques forming and groups forming. It tends to be organisations about that stage in their development, not in a simple organisation, but when you've got a functional organisation. It's beyond that because there's not enough people in this. Usually when you get to a matrix organisation, you're up around 150 employees and you've got branch offices. So it's usually that size of organisation where you've got a people-based culture. If you go a bit further and start a matrix organisation, that's when you move into the task culture. The downside here is friends start to form cliques. They tolerate poor performance. Usually you have meetings just to rubber stamp things. All of the meetings happen in corridors and informally. So that's some of the downsides to this organisation. And you get a lot of subcultures forming, so it slows down decisions. The organisation starts to move in different directions and they're not facing the same way. Can anybody think of any organisations where there's a strong people culture? Subcultures, cliques forming, those sort of things? Hospitals, yeah, absolutely. Government-run organisations like hospitals, yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Political parties as well. And you know, it doesn't matter which one it is, and usually the one in opposition has more of these subcultures forming because they've got less to do than govern the country, so they start inwardly looking at their own party, and you have factions that occur, and it starts tearing itself apart. And that's why you've got these ministerial changes that occur a lot of the time. They put ministers in charge of portfolios, and in order for them to keep following the same direction as the party, they'll so often do a cabinet reshuffle and rip the ministers out and put them in charge of new portfolios so that they don't attach to their subculture, their portfolios, and they keep following the party direction. Keep it on track. The way to build this culture, people culture, is when you recruit people, instead of advertising, you ask your friends to find out other friends that could work in the company. And usually when in the recruitment process you have lunch with them or have dinner with them, and it's the peers that actually do the hiring rather than the managers in this sort of culture. Again, lots of informal meeting areas and lunchrooms, very casual, lots of outside work events, birthday celebrations. People are part of the football team. Yep.
If you're hiring a lot of like-minded people, doesn't that increase your chances of groupthink?
A group thing where you're hiring yes people, yeah, absolutely. So the top management teams usually manage a bit better. But yes, it does. If you've got a people culture, group think, you'll have everybody facing the same way, and that's one of the problems in this organisation. I guess, to try to remove that groupthink phenomenon, you keep moving people around, particularly your managers, move them from one division to another, so you can cross-pollinate this organisation. Again, these organisations are unstable, they'll fall apart. Beyond about 150 people, you need to move to probably a task-based organisation. So you'll see this in like social workers, hospitals, primary schools, those sort of things. Also, this is a gender problem. If you look down here, this feeling or people characteristic, remember I said 2/3 of females have this dominant female feeling characteristic. Up here, that's a male, more of a male. The logic and the feeling, the logic and the thinking characteristic. 2/3 of males have more of that. So they've both got problems. If you've got an all-male organisation, remember I said there was high staff turnover? That's your problem there. You have a lot of bitching and cliques forming down in this organisation. So the idea is to mix them. You've got to have a really good mix, not one people, but you try to get a balanced organisation. That's what Google is, it's fairly balanced. So down here, schools, healthcare, government, hospitality, religion, those are mainly people-based organisations. So let's have a look at another case study. A country town in Victoria grew rapidly from the influx of thousands of people from around the world when gold was discovered there in the 1850s. These newcomers lived in tents and makeshift shanties. So the town's leaders all got together and said, right, I'd like to get these people out of these makeshift shanties and into permanent accommodation. So they formed the first permanent land and building society. Always wondered where the word permanent came from. It came from that, to get them out of tents and into timber or bricks and mortar accommodation. So what they did was the townspeople put a hat together and they started collecting contributions from the community, and they all put in 10 shillings or something every month from their paychecks. Then in the hat, all the people's names went, and when they had enough, they collected enough money to build a permanent residence, they'd reach into the hat and pull out somebody's name, and that lucky person got enough money to go and build a house or some permanent accommodation. And they had to go and use that money to rent the house, and they still kept contributing because they were so grateful they'd moved into permanent accommodation. Isn't that a nice idea? Yeah, Anyway, that sort of philosophy continued in this organisation. The philosophy of helping communities rather than just making money continued in this organisation, and it made them the largest permanent building society in Victoria. Anybody have got any ideas here? Who this is? No? They changed their name to Bendigo Bank in 1995, and I guess, and that's their head office there in Bendigo, that thing in the skyline there. They've also got this community bank program. While all the other banks were closing down offices in the rural towns, they didn't think they were economic. They started opening up branches, and the local community owns the branches. So if you had, say, up in Turramurra, we've got a Bendigo Bank up there, the newsagent owns a bit of it. All of the local people, the real estate agents, they all have a share in the Bendigo Bank retail outlet. So it's very much a community-based bank. Even on their website a few years ago, they said they recruit logical people, these logical people to do the financial analysis and the lending. The task people, which are down here, they do the admin. The visionaries do the strategic planning, the long-term thinkers, and the emotional people do the relationship management of the teller in the front line. And they also describe their customers. The logical people want all the facts and the figures. Their customers want the facts and the figures, and they do their research. The task-based people argue about 35 cents and want them to justify why they're charging them these fees. The emotional people are their big customer advocates. They're great advocates. And the visionaries are very poor record keepers. They're very frustrating people to deal with, but they're also very wealthy. These are the long-term thinkers. So if you look at the profile of most of the other banks, what's that dimension there? Very much task-based. What's that one there? Logic. That's the profile of an accountant, so it matches that it should be a profile of a bank too, but very much task-based. How do you think Bendigo looks different to that?
Square.
But yeah, a bit squarer. Yeah, they've rounded out this dimension here on the people aspect. And that's where they've got their competitive advantage. So you can use culture to get a competitive advantage. And its customer satisfaction rating in 2008 was 94%. The big four banks averaged about 59% in 2005. It's recently moved up to 78%, and Bendigo's come down a bit because they merged with Adelaide Bank, but they're still at about 12 points ahead of the big four banks. It was the fastest growing bank in 2003, and it's skewed a little bit because it merged with Adelaide Bank. They've got 190 branches that are owned, but 280 branches, and these are the ones that are community branches. They're the ones that are growing quite rapidly. They keep adding about 20 a year. So that's a people-based culture that's given them competitive advantage in the banking world. Let's have a look at the last one, results. If you've got a culture, and quite a few of you are going to end up in an organisation that's going to be task-based, where you're having to deliver results all the time. And they use goals and results as a way of controlling this organisational measurable standards. Mainly it'll be a matrix organisation structure and probably a project team matrix organisation structure that will be task-based. These organisations come together for the project and then they fall apart and you move on. So you don't have enough time to form good relationships with people because you're continually moving and doing your projects, and that's probably the organisation you'll end up in. I guess these organisations are great if you understand your competitive threats, your enemy. You can move very quickly to respond to competitive threats. Decisions are made centrally, and there's usually little debate. You just quickly move, particularly if you're turning a company around. Task-based organisations are terrific for quickly correcting a problem and turning something around. Everybody trusts each other because you're measured by the same high standards. And you have to do the same performance. The underachievers are usually removed. General Electric, a typical task-based organisation, they have 300,000 employees, but 85,000 managers or professionals. Top 10% receive stock options the bottom 10 are removed every year. So that's continually turning over. To them know that if they're in the 10%, then they're out of it each year. So there's a lot of internal competition. That's a negative for one of these organisations. People tend not to share information as much as in a people-based organisation.
So job definitions would be very clearly defined in these organisations. You wouldn't join it for the people aspects of social life. You only stay to get what you can get out of it to move on and get to the next level. As soon as they don't meet your personal needs, then you're out of there. So there's nothing that's holding you to these organisations. And very centralised decision making, very good feedback system. So let's have a look at that. This is down here, all of the technical areas, operations, also banking as well. Let's have a look at that. Banking and finance, transport, construction. If you end up in construction or project management or manufacturing or mining, you're probably going to end up in a task-based culture. So this company started producing light bulbs in 1891, then moved into vacuum tubes in 1927, then into semiconductors in 1953. So it's come from the electrical age and moved right through to the electronic age. The company invented the compact audio cassette tape in '63, and this cassette tape here for audio storage. And it set the industry standard. That was its real key to success. It set the industry standard. Then it licensed its standard to other companies, and other companies started making those cassette tapes. The record industry was upset because it moved from vinyl LPs or records through to the cassette tape, and it displaced the LPs. Those tapes were also used in answering machines, and the first PCs, that was the storage device, that cassette tape. Instead of a hard disk, you stored all your data on these cassette tapes in a PC. The company then tried to they moved it from audio into video and tried to set the video cassette tape standard with the V2000. Sony Betamax also tried to set the industry standard with the Betamax. Who do you think we're talking about here? Philips? Yeah, absolutely. JVC came out with VHS and set the standard for video cassette recorders because they opened up the standard instead of making it proprietary. And so when we're talking about Philips, it lost its competitive edge in the mid-1890s, and it was on close to bankruptcy or collapse. It was very much there, a people-based culture down in that quadrant. Lots of little clicks, and it squashed information flow. The R&D people didn't talk to the operations people who didn't talk to the marketing people, so no information flowed between these departments. And if the R&D people are not talking to the marketing people, that means they're developing products that really are not valued by the customer. That's what happened. Many of Philips' new products failed to get into the market, and the customers didn't want the technology. They had a success with Sony with this CD. Everybody thinks the compact disc was Sony's development. It wasn't. It was a joint venture between Philips and Sony in '82. The problem with the company, though, was the authority and the objectives were always routinely challenged. Very much a people-based culture. Nobody was moving in the same way. And management's lack of control allowed the employees to relax. They forgot about that they had any competitive threats and no sense of the competition. Who are the competitors here, by the way, back in '82? Who are your competitors for Philips? TDK, yeah, that would be one. Panasonic, yep. Samsung? No, probably not Samsung in those days. What's Samsung? Is that Korean? Yeah. The Koreans got going in the 90s. The Japanese were all over it in the 80s. And then the Koreans started, LG started coming in, Samsung, all the Koreans started coming in. But they were real threats in those days, and Philips just ignored them. So Philips had to move from that people-based culture to a task-based culture. They had to really pull down on this and try to turn the company around very quickly, otherwise they were just about broken. They got a guy in called Jan Timmer in 1990 who was appointed as chairman and president, and he put in measurable performance standards. He made this culture very task-based because he measured everything and set very high targets. He also reduced their comfort levels because he started praising the Japanese competitors' product quality, which was unheard of in Philips. And he conducted frequent management conferences and kept espousing the objectives and the procedures and the values. They were continually communicated to these people. Now, all the existing people-based managers there, what do you think they did?
they moved on, absolutely, they all jumped ship because he was demanding commitment to these goals and these new measurable performance standards. So the rest of the people that were there and they liked the people-based culture, they just they departed, which was a quick way of turning the company around. And then I guess at these meetings, he started to increase the people-based culture again because he got through the turnaround. And if you don't pull back on the people, you'll start. So he started pulling back this way. Also, he started pulling on the vision here and increasing the effort in research and development. You'll start to fragment the company. So now they've got a culture that's pretty much like that. It's starting to be a bit more square. They then, in 2006, again with Sony, people think, oh, it's Sony that developed the Blu-ray disc. That was a joint venture with Philips and Sony. The reason it was successful, and it has been successful in the market, is you're able to store a lot more because it's using ultraviolet light to pack all of or burn the discs and read the discs rather than just visible light. They sold off their semiconductors in 2006, and as I said, it was one of the few companies that made it from the electrical world through to the electronic age, and is still going, employing 120,000 staff, mainly because that guy pulled it away from being a people-based culture and bankruptcy into more of a task-based culture. So we've been around the wheel now. We've had a look at different personalities of companies. Let's have a look at the life cycle effects on culture. I guess most companies, small, start as a visionary culture. They start like a small Google and then move to more of a task-based culture with lots of rules and procedures. So I guess most companies start life there. And that's also the profile not only of an entrepreneur but a salesperson. So they start with a fairly heavy sales-based culture. Then they'll move very quickly into a task-based culture to get up the curve and start building distribution. And when you get nearer to the top of the curve, that looks more like an accountant, so a financial sort of culture at the top of the curve. So I guess when you start life, most small companies are very entrepreneurial. It's all about crisis management. You're continually firefighting. It's chaotic. The primary focus there is to just survive. In an entrepreneurial culture, it's company-wide risk-taking. It's all hands to the pump. Everybody jumps in and does things. They're extremely close to their customers and very sales-driven. It's at about that stage in a small company's life where the inner circle of culture forms. The inner circle of culture it's really the keepers of the company's culture. When I was with Motorola, we had 300 people down in Melbourne in a manufacturing facility, and the guy that kept the company's culture was named Jock, and he worked on the dock packing boxes. So he wasn't part of management, but he'd just been there forever. And if you had to do anything, like make a decision about people or anything, people would go and talk to Uncle Jock and ask him, what do you think? Is this a good thing or not? So he kept the company's personality. It was and as I said, you don't need to have top management or the CEO in the inner circle. It just forms, usually with the founders of the company. As you move up that life cycle curve, bureaucracy starts to occur because these people in the inner circle, you start recruiting 9-to-5ers and people that are on the outer circle. With rapid growth also, you get revenue growth, and your focus turns from from survival through to just delivering. It's all about then cost saving. Instead of revenue creation and trying to get customers, you've got your customers, now let's pull some cost out and make it more efficient. I guess what happens at this stage is a lot of managers start to become dominant. The entrepreneurs get sick of the company and leave because it gets too big for them. They want to go and start another small company. Communication becomes very formal, lots of meetings, lots of reporting, rules and procedures that are formed because you want to replicate the pattern. You have this cancer that forms called administration. It's an immune system called administration, and it kills anything that doesn't fit the mould. And then this group of nameless, faceless bureaucrats called them emerge. particularly if you have a matrix organisation, you'll have us and them. The branches are us, and them are the people in head office. And I guess this cancer of mediocrity starts to form. Have a think about your own organisation that you work in, and see if this applies to you. So yeah, a matrix structure usually causes, if it's not carefully managed, us and them to occur. So what's happening here is you've got all of the founders that started the company, and then you start employing the 9-to-5ers, and that's the outer circle. And if you don't weld these people into the culture, then they'll start to form power groups, because it's quite lonely in the outer circle. And these power groups tend to go off in different directions. Instead of going in the same direction as the company, they start to tear the company apart. So you get bureaucracy that forms. About here, where we're getting into maturity, sometimes the CEO has got to be a change agent and start developing into other directions. And usually mergers and acquisitions occur, they start buying other companies, and you get into this developmental culture where you're adding more companies and you're further complicating the structure. So usually a CEO's job there is to have the company running without him or her, and then going off and developing other new companies, other small companies and businesses. So the job of the chief executive there is to grow that inner circle and make it bigger, and then pull the people that have got the culture out of the company and put them into new businesses. Who would typically, what organisation has done that? We've discussed this organisation just recently. Virgin, absolutely. If you talk to, if you go to Branson's conference, he's a culture vulture. He's not only a venture capitalist, but as he's growing all these small businesses and funding them, he's working on his culture, getting people enculturated, and then ripping them out and putting them into these new businesses. I guess the problems here is if you're going to take the business into different directions, managers are risk averse. We've just spent 4 years or 5 years teaching you as engineers how to assess risk and analyse risk and make all of these decisions based on being risk averse. Being a development manager, you're taking the company into an unknown area, into a high risk area, and managers resist that, and they tend to pull back on it. Managers tend to be short term and want to minimise risks, whereas leaders want to take the company into different directions. And finally, right at the top, you've got a portfolio culture, you've got a divisional structure supporting it, and the leader needs to be trying to weld the companies together that they've gone off and bought and acquired under one distinctive competency or competitive advantage. So let's have a look at competitive advantage. If we're trying to develop an innovative organisation and we're using that word as our competitive advantage, what's the culture diagram look like? I've asked this in an exam before. Goes what?
Top right.
Top right, visionary, yep, absolutely. That's if you've got innovation as your competitive advantage, you've got to match your people to that competitive advantage. How about value? Which way would you go there?
Bottom right.
Bottom
Right.
bottom right? Value or price? Yeah. Low price. Yeah. Usually, it looks like that. Very much a task-based culture where there's no innovation going on whatsoever or logic. It's all about just cut the price, and it's usually a task-based culture for that one. How about relationships? If you've got that as your fundamental competitive advantage, which way? People, yeah, bottom right, absolutely. And if you've got these as a competitive advantage, quality or security, I've just noticed over the years, the companies that compete like that are usually companies that have got both logic, high logic profile and also high task based. Very much like an accounting firm. And supporting responsiveness, I've noticed over the years also lots of people because of responsiveness, and also task based to make them quick to respond to those to the people. And finally, flexibility, or not finally, but flexibility. I've noticed they're usually small companies, high visionary component, and also high people component for flexibility. How about efficiency? Last one. Task, absolutely. And usually, if you're very efficient and cost focused, then you're also price focused. And that's why you have a task-based culture for those. Okay. Well, let's have a look at decision making now. Decision making. You can have an organisation that's decentralised or centralised. Which organisation do you think you'll end up in? A decentralised decision making organisation or a centralised? Which organisation do you think you'll end up in? The decisions made at the lower levels, at the front line, or right at the top? Sorry? You'll end up in one that's right at the top. Yeah. I think more and more today, because we're employing you for your brains and for you to make decisions about projects or things that you're working on, you'll probably end up in that, a decentralised decision-making organisation. This is where job descriptions and specialisations de-emphasise. You're given your own project to do. They're really dependent on you to go and run it and manage it. So they de-emphasise status and rank. This is typical Google. De-emphasise status and rank. Problem solving is emphasised. So engineers would be all about solving problems. That would be emphasised. Authority is delegated to you. So if you get it wrong, you have to fix it. It's all about horizontal relationships, and the structure is quite flexible and adaptable. So I guess instead of an organisation that's very centralised in the decision making, you'll probably end up in an organisation that's very decentralised. And the nice thing about that organisation is you don't need all of the management on top of it. You end up in quite a flat organisation, and you can save on the bureaucratic costs of all the managers. The way to remove all the managers is the internet and information allows the front line to get access to the information about the business, and also allows the head office to get information. So that's enabled decentralisation as well. I guess these authoritarian, centralised, multi-layer hierarchical structures aren't suited to today's fast-moving world. Organisations need to be flexible and need to adapt to changes in the market. The guy called Jack Welch, who ran General Electric, said the firms need to be able to change their tyres while the car's still rolling. So you need to be very quick at adapting. Who's Charles Darwin? Charles Darwin? The guy, who did evolution, the theory of evolution. He says it's not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. So change is, in order to survive in today's world, you've got to be fast, you've got to be flexible, and you've got to be able to change. So in the 1980s, customers' preferences shifted from standardised products to custom-made products, and they wanted to be treated as individuals. Product life cycles became shorter, mass production was replaced by mass customisation, and corporates started to lose a lot of staff and restructure and downsize in order to keep up with this new world where we're treating customers as individuals rather than en masse. And if you look at Dell, that's a Dell workstation there, an old Dell workstation. Dell don't have people that sit on assembly lines and just load chips on boards or put housings together on PCs. They build the whole PC in small teams of 2 or 3 people. So the team is the fundamental building block of a decentralised organisation, and also the team working together. You don't need a lot of management. The team self-manages and runs itself. So let's have a look at a case study on decentralisation. The Nuclear Corporation of America manufactured nuclear instruments in the 1950s. In 1964, the company came close to bankruptcy. They got out of the nuclear instrument business because they were going broke, and they refocused on manufacturing steel joints. The company integrated backwards into steel making in 1968, and they implemented these electric arc furnaces into their mills. It was a new, efficient way of producing steel. They recycled a lot of steel from cars and things like that. Nucor's electric arc furnaces required far less capital investment. They're very small, and you didn't need to invest a lot. compared to the old blast furnaces used in the existing steel mills. And they didn't need as many production steps and less labour to produce steel. The other blast furnaces produce steel from iron ore. Anyway, the company changed its name to Nucor in '72, and they produced steel products by recycling scrap steel. Now, Nucor's strategy was to be the lowest cost, the most efficient and the lowest cost in the commodity market. Does that make sense? Absolutely. Where you're governed by low prices, also be low cost, and that's what they achieved. They maintain their technological lead by being the first to market with new steelmaking technologies. They leapfrog their competitors. In 2007, Nucor was the largest recycler of scrap metal in the US. They recycled nearly 10 cars in its 49 facilities. Nucor was the largest steel producer in the US. They had a production capacity of 27 million tonnes of steel last year. Their steel mills are highly automated. They require fewer employees per tonne than its competitors. They operate on a just-in-time basis, virtually no finished goods. Now, they turned over 20 billion last year. They employed 20,000 staff. Actually, they've got 200 facilities. They've got 49 scrap facilities, but 200 facilities in all, and 5 layers of management. There's their 5 layers of management there. Is that a lot of management for a $20 billion company? Not really. That's their 5 layers. Corporate headquarters, they reported in 2010 to have 95 people. They cut that down to 75. Is that a lot of people in head office for a $20 billion company employing 20,000 people? 75 people in head office. It's highly decentralised. They decentralise most of the management. So in that bit there, there's only 75 people now. They decentralise most of the decisions back down to the plant manager at each of the plants running the plants. Nucor's head office reception area isn't much bigger than a wardrobe. Okay? So it's very small. From 66 to 2008, they were always profitable. They had a one loss year here in 2009 when the GFC hit, and it really decreased the volume of steel required in the US. But they've rebounded now back to profitability. So in all of those years, they were always profitable. Steel mill utilisation in 2008 dropped from 92% to 40% in 2009, so basically half after the GFC. The demand for steel declined by 53%, so that was their first loss ever, 290 million, but they're now back at profitability in 2010. They're very dependent on the US construction industry. In difficult times, everyone suffers. So in the 82 recession, the shop floor people, salaries were by 25%. The managers were cut by 60% and the CEO by 75%. Does that sound fair? Definitely sounds fair. Each plant is a profit centre, measured by its own it has its own functional managers, its own accountant, salespeople and engineering people. So they're all small business units. It's not unionised, but it has great industrial relations. The company has never laid off an employee from lack of work. They've never terminated an employee because of a downturn. Nucor plants don't have job descriptions. They say it just gets in the way. They're all team-based, so the teams manage themselves, so they're self-managing. And decision-making is pushed right down to the front line, to the lowest level. They don't have an R&D department. Most of the R&D is done by the front line, people coming up with ideas. If they fail, but at least they test them. Employees' performance is managed by the plant supervisor. It's very visible, and the team's peer group manages themselves. There are no company cars or executive dining facilities. The executives fly economy class because it's a low-cost company, so it's low cost right the way through the company. At Nucor, everyone's paycheck goes up or down based on the team's performance at the front line. The production staff, the people that are working at the front line in the hot steel mill, they get between 80 and 150% of their base pay every week. It's measured, and if they've done a good job and exceeded their targets, they get between 80 and 150% more on top of their base pay. no bonus is paid if the equipment's not operating. So the people on the shop floor make sure the maintenance people keep those machines working, and the maintenance people are also paid on performance. Does that sound fair?
Yep.
Yeah. Departmental managers get up to about 80% of their pay, base pay, based on incentives. They've got to hit a net income target each year. Even the professional and clerical people get paid on a division's return on assets. So everybody's on a performance-based scheme. The senior officers can get up to 300% of their base salary based on return on equity or revenue growth. When Ucore has a profitable year, a highly profitable year, then not only do you get your 80 to 150% base pay, but you get an additional performance bonus as well, where they share 10% of the operating profits are shared to the employees. Does that sound like a good thing to do? Does that sound like your organisation that you work for? No. Okay.
So why don't more businesses do this, or the stingy?
Yeah, why don't they?
Yeah.
I've heard, I was in Victoria this morning, and I heard that they're trying to get primary school teachers to get onto a similar scheme like this, and I thought it's going to fail. I think why this works really well is it's very measurable. You can measure performance. When I heard that this morning about primary school teachers, it's very difficult to measure whether they're doing a better job or not. But anyway.
I get that, but surely there are plenty of other engineering-like firms who could actually implement this.
Yeah, and it's probably your job when you get out there to do it. Yeah. Look, I'm a director of this software testing company, and we've got pretty much exactly the same thing, and our company's growing like you wouldn't believe. Yeah. Where you're sharing your returns back with the people, with the staff that actually produce the goods. Yeah.
What about the old piecework days?
That's similar to the piecework day. Can I just finish this one? Yeah, okay. Ucore plant staff earn around twice as much as other similar employees in manufacturing organisations. On average, 2/3 of an employee's pay comes from the bonuses. Yeah? So unions tend to be irrelevant in this organisation because they're very close to the management team. Hey, who are the management team? Themselves, pretty much. They've got 75 people sitting in head office, but they're not doing most of it. It's themselves. Ucore's workers have become so well paid that one woman told her husband, "If you ever get fired from Ucore, I'll divorce you." Yeah? Ucore management believe their employees should be well compensated because that's a bad job. It's hot, it's strenuous, there could be a lot of accidents in that job, so they need to be compensated for it. Staff turnover and absenteeism is extremely low. Staff have 4 sick days, but if they take more than that, then it affects their bonuses, so they don't take more than that, they just go and get paid. All the company's performances are charted there. You can very easily calculate the bonus that you're going to get paid. And they've gone and acquired lots more steel companies along the way to keep growing. When they acquire them, within 6 months they put in their incentive schemes and their bonus schemes, and the productivity of those companies also increases. So there's a lot to be said for decentralised decision making and rewards. So let's have a look at a centralised organisation now. I guess some of these organisations are still around where all of the procedures are centralised and the staff just turn up and don't make any decisions. This is where your tasks are very clearly defined. Again, I don't think any of you are going to end up in a highly centralised organisation. Lots of standard policies and procedures and rules to guide your decision making. That's probably not why an organisation will employ you. They want you to make the decisions for them. And it's very vertical, this organisation. Communication is up and down rather than across. So most of the decisions are made here, right at the top of the organisation. It makes the top very visible. If you look at the franchises and these retail chains, they're highly centralised, where most of the decision making is made at the top. Again, the people working at the low levels of these organisations, for instance, like McDonald's, don't need to make so many decisions because there's lots of rules and procedures and systems, and it makes sure that your delivery is consistent right through the organisation. So where you've got a front line where you're not having to make too many decisions, this works, having a centralised organisation. The trouble is it's slow to respond because the people in the front line don't send the feedback all the way up through middle management. So it's very slow to respond to changes in the market. So we'll take another steel company. Bethlehem Steel was once the second largest steel producer in the US. Bethlehem had a 21-storey office complex to house its executive staff, and it had many layers of management. And indeed, that's one of its office complexes in San Francisco. One building that they constructed was shaped like a cross. And the reason it was shaped like a cross was all their vice presidents needed corner offices with corner windows, 2 windows. So when you've got a cross, you could get more corner offices into that building, see? So are they very focused on their people here?
Yes.
Yeah, they're top people, aren't they? Yeah, not the people in the steel mills. Bethlehem had a fleet of corporate jets for their top executives, for their executives' kids to go to boarding school and for them to go to weekend hideaway retreats. Bethlehem also owned an 18-hole golf course, world-class golf course for their executives. And their company had very adversarial industrial relations and also entrenched unions. I wonder why. Yeah. In the 80s, Nucor was a third of the size of Bethlehem. In 82, Bethlehem reported a loss of 1.5 billion and shut down many of its operations. In 83, Bethlehem's CEO blamed cheap imported foreign steel. Is that really a problem, cheap imported foreign steel? What competitive disadvantage would foreign steel have? Quality is one problem. That's why a lot of steel doesn't come into Australia, because of the quality. Anything else? Transport? Yeah, it's heavy stuff, isn't it? And you've got all that transport, the lead time costs. These are real problems. Yep.
If transport's such a costly issue, why are so many car manufacturers exporting and producing overseas? It's cheaper for them to export for manufacturing and then import it back. So, say Ford in America, it's cheaper for them to manufacture it, even with American wages, to go to, say, Thailand, ship the raw materials from the States to Thailand.
Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, get it manufactured, and in Mexico as well.
Yeah.
Manufactured in Thailand.
I would have thought they just sourced the stuff there. Anyway, maybe the quality's not so good in Thailand, so they have to bring the stuff in. But that's really expensive. You try to, use the stuff that's there, wouldn't you?
That's right.
And then bring the stuff back. But anyway, this CEO in '83 decided, he's going to blame the cheap foreign imports. By the time the steel was landed, it wasn't so cheap at all. In fact, Nucor looked at it and said, right, foreign imports have a competitive disadvantage because it's heavy, it's expensive to transport. Nucor thought the industry's problem in the US was management rather than the imports, and I think they were correct. In the mid-80s, demand for heavy structural grades of steel, the sort of steel that Bethlehem was producing from iron ore in their blast furnaces, declined. The construction industry moved to much lighter, low-rise construction. They didn't need these heavy grades of steel. Bethlehem failed to move with the times and embrace new technology. They closed down, they were vertically integrated, they closed down their coal mining, so they integrated backwards to their supply, which is the coal mining. They also integrated forwards into the uses of steel, so they closed down their railroad car and shipbuilding manufacturing operations to try to preserve their steel operations. Finally, the surge of imported foreign steel during '98 drove the US commodity prices down, and in 2001 they went into bankruptcy, and most of their plants were sold off to this international steel group. Very centralised organisation, very entrenched and antagonistic relations with their people on the front line. So let's have a look at the organisation life cycle. It usually begins as very centralised. When you begin a company, it's usually one person and highly centralised decision making. Or you might begin by setting up a small web development company where there's 4 friends that work in it together. If you've got that sort of structure, what's wrong with that? There's no leader, and usually if it's 4 friends together, no decisions get made. It's a committee that's running it. You need to transfer it into that. When I read a business plan and you see the title Joint Managing Director, there's 2 MDs, that's a bad sign that the company's not making decisions. So you really should,
even though they're 4 equal shareholders, you really should nominate somebody that's going to run the company, and then they can start making some decisions. So to get up the life cycle curve, usually quite centralised still. When it gets to maturity, the company starts growing, you're adding a lot more people, the decision making gets decentralised to the front line. Particularly if you go into a matrix structure, it becomes quite centralised. If you get into decline, you need somebody that's going to control the cost. Again, it puts back to highly centralised. So that's the organisation. Let's have a look at leadership. Now, leadership also influences an organisation culture. Which one of the components? All these things impact the organisation culture. All these things do. Leadership is one of those elements that does. What's the difference between leadership and management? Anyone know?
Does a leader take more responsibility for success or failure?
Sorry?
Does a leader take more responsibility?
No, they should both take responsibility for success and failure.
Vision?
Any difference between leadership and that? What's
Leader takes risk.
leader? Yeah, much higher risk profile. Leader's a risk taker. The manager's a risk averse, or a risk manager, if you like. So let's have a look at the differences. Leaders tend to be more opportunity driven and going and taking the company in a new direction, establishing direction. Managers tend to be more conservative and more about controlling, planning, budgeting. So these people are about communicating direction. These people are about organising staff and approving budgets, getting the structure right, delegating. Leaders tend to motivate people and inspire them and energise them, whereas the managers are more about, instead of the art, the science of obtaining results and controlling and problem solving. So these are about change, and these are about being consistent and managing your way through. Leaders operate in a vague, self-developed environment, whereas the managers are in a far more defined environment. If you think about the personalities, leaders are more visionary and managers are more task-based. So they're quite opposite people. Leaders, it's a role. Managers can be appointed to their position, whereas leaders can't. In order to lead, you need followers, so you can't appoint yourself to the position. Managers can be promoted into their positions, leaders can't. I guess if you're a poor leader, informal leaders like unions will appoint a union representative. Usually where unions are quite strong is management or leaders aren't doing a very good job, and they're not looking after their people. So an informal leader will rise to the challenge and be appointed, because people need to be led. They can't be led in a vacuum. I guess, I said that about union representatives. Leaders tend to be very simple and visionary. Managers love detail, and they tend to be task-based. Leaders strip away the clutter, and they look for one of those words, the competitive advantage, and they keep following that direction, whereas managers tend to hop around a lot. This guy that ran General Electric, Jack Welch, said, "Insecure managers create complexity. Frightened, nervous managers use thick, convoluted planning books and busy slides filled with everything they have learned since their childhood. Real leaders don't need clutter and statistics. People must have the self-confidence to be clear, precise, and sure that every person in their organisation understands what the business is trying to achieve. Clear, tough-minded people are the most simple. Middle managers fear simplicity." So leaders just look at one word, look at the vision, and keep heading there, whereas middle managers are afraid of simplicity, like a lot of clutter. So let's have a look at the organisation life cycle here. Usually the creator, or the ENTP, the Myers-Briggs ENTP, is the leader that starts the organisation. They create, they're visionary, they're doers. Usually it's one person that starts it, and then you put in a simple culture, a simple structure And if you're not careful, the leader will make too many decisions to become a bottleneck. What's the time? 3:10. What you need to do at this stage of the organisation, when you're first starting it out, set a very clear direction and a clear mission, and keep communicating it. Sometimes entrepreneurial organisations, you may have too many opportunities to go and follow. When I work with a small company, I make sure they stay very focused on their vision and just follow that direction and refocus on their mission statement. What you should then do is try to build a team underneath you and put in a functional structure. So as you're building your organisation, start to appoint more middle managers to look after the functional structure and start putting in systems and procedures. Now, as we go up the life cycle curve, this is a profile of a salesperson, an ESTP, and this is where we're focused on distribution and building distribution. We need usually an ESTP leader to take over there and build the organisation. What will happen though is if they're not careful, these middle managers will take their departments in different directions. So you've got to keep continually bringing them back and following the organisational goal. You've got to hire talented people to fill in functional voids. So hire a good CFO, hire a good marketing person, a good engineer, and keep orienting all of those departments on your core competency. Keep them focused in one direction. Right. When you get to about maturity, then you hire an ENTJ, a CEO, or it's called the leader. They're very good at administration and management. They're very strong leaders. This is where management takes over to take the company up into maturity. They start building teams, so they become both a team builder, a coach, and a planner. You put in very strong policies and procedures to support the structure, and you have usually lots of cross-functional teams and people meeting regularly. When the organisation starts dying, as far as the volume starts declining, then you need the ENTP coming back in, the creator, and taking the organisation in a different direction. So you're going in and developing it and starting to acquire other companies, take it into different directions. The problem here is most managers don't like this. They're very risk averse. They don't like change, going into new directions. So that can be one of the problems here. Okay, and finally, at the top of the organisation curve, you go from a functional structure to a divisional structure where you start building separate companies underneath you and appointing CEOs underneath those companies to go and run the organisation. Right at the bottom, if you're going into decline, that's the profile of an accountant or an inspector, an ISTJ. They've got strong financial skills to try to milk the last bit of profitability out of the business. So let's have a break for 15 minutes.
Nothing much yourself?